Welcome to Nutmeg Chatter. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. A self-styled opera-preneur, Katie Kat has performed throughout the world with her music and theatrical endeavors. Her first album of art songs, entitled Dvorak's Love Songs, comes out March 25th, 2017. So we hope you enjoy our chat with Katie Kat here on Nutmeg Chatter. Welcome to Nutmeg Chatter. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. Katie Kat, thank you for coming on the program here at WAPJ.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you in the studio here. I had the pleasure of interviewing you back in 2014, and I'd also like to say just at the onset, I'm a fan of your work, and I was a supporter on the Kickstarter because I'm looking forward to the album that's going to come out on March 25th.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I'm really excited for this too. This project has been in the works for far too long.
Well, you have to. It's your art. So, and the one thing that I do know about you is that you want to, if you're going to do something, you're going to do it right. And so, obviously, that's what you're doing. I said Dvorak's Love Songs, and I probably mispronounced Dvorak's. How would you pronounce it?
Right, it's Dvorak. So the R has sort of a reflexive. It's like the j and an r at the same time. Dvorak.
Dvorak. Okay, very nice. That's what inspired you about this particular work.
I'm a performer and I love stories. I really love to tell stories. I love to read stories, especially true stories, historical stories, things that we still to this day can relate to, things that are timeless. And when I stumbled across these love songs, of course, I'm in love with Anton Dvorak's music. He sort of shares that same philosophy, the love of stories and the love of history. But these songs were exceptionally personal and have a very, very interesting story.
Wow, and I'm so glad to know that this is something that inspires you because I know that you've sung Dvorak previously, and that's really cool. I know that like when I think of Katie Kat as the artist, I know that you perform in Connecticut, but I associate you most with New York. Would I be wrong in that?
No, I definitely perform a lot more in New York. One of the companies that I perform with regularly is based in New York.
Okay, so that's where it is, and so you've performed throughout the world, but you have performed in Connecticut, and you often perform in New York. That would be a good way of describing that. Okay, and you are a solo performer, but you have also worked with groups or troops, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay, excellent. Let's focus on your solo work in the very beginning. When I think of an opera singer, that's not something that, everybody can do.
Right.
What inspired you about opera?
I've always been a singer and a performer, and I have always wanted to do things more, do things better, do things to the highest extent that I possibly could do. I'm a perfectionist, and when I have to say that the very first idea in my head to I want to be an opera singer was my mother bought a CD and put it on, and I heard this voice, and it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before in my life. And I can't remember exactly how old I was. I was a little bit older, older child, probably 10. And it was Renee Fleming. And she was singing the song To the Moon, which is from Anton Dvorak's Rusalka. So that was the first thought in my head. I want to be this.
Wow. And then you studied. So this is not just I'm going to be this, and then you take the Mel Bay, learn to opera on your own. You actually you studied this, correct?
Yes. I had to sort of wait till I could drive to take my own self to my voice lessons, but I did a lot of research on teachers in the area. I got involved heavily in the community theater, and I ended up going, to college for it. I had to put myself through county college for 2 years, and kind of hopped around to finish my undergraduate degree and ended up at NYU for my master's degree. And I have a master's in classical voice and in an advanced certificate of vocal pedagogy, which is teaching.
Wow. Okay.
Hmm.
So you teach as well as perform yourself.
I
That's
do.
correct? Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you also took a life-changing trip to Italy to sing as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I um so this is a kind of a long story, I guess. I actually had something happen to me health-wise that took me way out of commission. I had to drop out of school, and it was really, really hard recovery. And I sort of got up, and instead of being discouraged, I said, "This is what I want to do, and I am going to do this." I sort of had, this terrifying jolt to an urgency to really do something great. So I actually sold jewelry at craft fairs to afford to go to this training program, the Spoleto Art Symposium in Spoleto, Italy. And I got to meet Enzo Ferrari, who was one of Maria Callas's voice coaches. I worked with um, Nico Castel, who's one of the world's greatest tenors. He recently passed, but it was an incredible experience.
Wow. And so, yeah, your music has taken you throughout the world to be able to share your music.
Hmm.
And so now you're going to be sharing that as well in a form that people can. I assume there'll be a downloadable version as well as the CD.
Yes, I'm working with a company that it's all going to sort of be released at the same time. So there
Sure.
will be a downloadable version. But I worked very hard on this project to make it something more than a usual, just a normal CD. I wanted this to be an art book as well. And I found a company that's going to produce something um, as close to my vision as possible. So inside everything it looks like an old journal, and all of the translations is all hand painted by me.
Wow. So
Hmm.
you did the artwork as
I
well.
did
That's
all of the artwork. Hmm.
so you're more than just an opera-preneur at this
Yes.
point. You're an art. Let's delve into that phrase just a little bit. Opera-preneur. I think what's great about that particular phrase is that it must be a challenging experience to be able to promote opera in a time and a culture that's not the most common expression. Would that be
Hmm.
a fair assessment to say?
Right, exactly. So I actually started performing places where you wouldn't normally expect to see an opera singer. I started performing at conventions, things like Comic
Hmm.
Cons and um, these indoor Renaissance fairs. The Wicked Fair in New Jersey, I started performing there. So, and people would stumble upon me, sort of just, sometimes I would busk, for tips in a corner,
Hmm.
and just be enthralled. I have had the greatest compliment I've ever received, and thankfully I've received it several times, is I never knew I liked opera until I saw you sing.
That's huge.
It's
That's
huge. It's so I know I consider myself doing opera reenactment and opera outreach, as well as being a thoughtful performer and artist in the traditional sense.
That's amazing. And so, what we're going to do is when we come back, we're going to continue that thought process and that discussion. We're going to learn a little bit more about what it takes to be an opera singer, an opera-preneur, if you will, here in 2017. We'll be back in just a moment on Nutmeg Chatter. Welcome back to Nutmeg Chatter. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. I'm here in the studio with Katie Kat. Katie Kat is an opera-preneur. Her work of Dvorak's love songs will be coming out on March 25th, 2017. We were just talking about how you were able to share your work, share your through many unconventional ways, using that phrase, including conventions, if you
Hmm.
will, but
Exactly.
in unconventional ways And one of the greatest compliments that you said that you've received is that I did not know that I liked opera until I heard you perform. And
Yes.
that's an amazing thing. That sounds very life-changing, almost as life-changing as you as a young girl hearing that Renee Fleming album at that
Mm-hmm.
time, way back when, correct?
Yes. Yes. And that's a huge honor, and I take that very, very seriously.
Now, and part of your work is also as a teacher. Have you found that people, in hearing that, want to then sing and learn from you because they've heard you sing and they've said, "Well, I'd like to sing, maybe if not opera, but hit notes the same way that you can."
Yes,
Is that
yes, they do. They do approach me for lessons. I am in the process of setting up um, sort of a Skype lesson studio through my Patreon feed. Patreon is this really great platform for independent artists to sort of have a blog, a video blog, where people can subscribe to them and support them for as little as $1, as much as $100, and you can set, how much the cap on your pledges for a month. It's really user friendly for people who want to support the artist. So I'm starting to use that to do Skype lesson sessions. Um, and so that makes it really easy for people to have access to some constructive work on their voices.
Sure, that's great. Um, one of your phrases that one of your quote, if you will, a Katie Kat
Mm-hmm.
quote, which is was kind of a hallmark of a TED talk that you were able to provide,
Yes.
is that opera is an art form. It has the ability to communicate stories beyond words. Could
Yes.
you could you expand on that a little bit for our audience? Tell us a little bit about that particular thought process.
Well, I think you can make that comment much grander, and that music in itself communicates all of the things that you can't find the words to express. So, opera is an art form. You are, well, let's take a staged opera. The art forms that are merged in that production is astounding. You think about the costuming, the artwork that goes into the set work, the of course the composition within itself,
Sure.
and the acting, which is becoming much much more important as opera houses are actually getting smaller. And so the acting is becoming much much more important. The connecting to the prosody of the words, and of course the vocal line and the music. So all of those things are married in this work of art to tell this story.
And do you think you mentioned that opera houses are getting smaller, or at least
Yes.
the venues to perform operas may be getting smaller? Do you find that some opera houses are now catering more towards the greatest hits, if you will, or something that is the most well known and recognized to try to pull people in? Or do you find opera houses are performing newer work? Is there are there newer works that are being performed?
Yes, there are newer works that are being performed. Um, Opera America and the National Opera Center in New York City is doing some amazing things for new composers and new compositions. Um, and even some of the bigger houses are premiering, 21st century and newer works. They, of course, do perform the greatest hits, as you would call them,
Sure.
because those do draw they still draw the biggest crowds.
Because that's what I would do. That's why I'm
Hmm.
asking you because if that's what I would probably do. So that's why I wanted
Yes,
to ask.
they still draw the biggest crowds, and there's something to that,
Hmm.
that these works are so timeless.
Right. Right. They
Hmm.
are. But I'm glad to hear that there is an opportunity for newer works to come out there, and
Right. Let me
that.
tell you, I if I had known you were going to ask this question, I would have made a point to remember who the composers were. There was an opera. It's a short opera. It's about 45 minutes, and it's for, I think, 8 voices. And it's unconventional. Well, because it's short, because it's also in English. And it's 8 voices, and one of the voices is a rock and roll voice.
Interesting.
Yes. The opera is called Winkensport. Winkensport is the sport is, oh my goodness, I think it's Swiss,
Hmm.
and it's finch sitting. And so all of the characters are actually called by the names they call their birds. and it's whoever's bird falls asleep last is the winner. So
That's
they take a finch in a cage and they put a box over it and they sit on the box, and whichever person's finch falls asleep last is the winner.
and that's the sport. That's in the
That is
story
it.
in the story of
Yes, that is it.
Vinken sport.
Hmm.
That's
But the relationships between these people, like, one is in love with the other and she can't express her feelings, so she sort of expresses it through, talking about the bird. Of course, there's, the tragedy of that rock and roll voice.
hmm.
That character actually drugs his bird so that the bird stays awake longer.
Wow.
So like there's that real
Tension and
real tension,
yeah,
real issue there. It's
yeah.
not all comedy because you
Right.
you start talking about Finkensport, the sport of finch sitting, and it sounds like this is a silly sort of comedy, and there is a lot of comedy in there, but then there's some really serious issues that are addressed, and then the baritone aria that ends the the 45 minutes, he releases his bird into the wind, and you're in tears. It's just an incredible work.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
well. I'm glad to know that there such ideas are being able to be expressed and have a venue and a way to get out there. So that's
Hmm.
glad to know about that. You mentioned that opera happened to be in English. Um, what is your particular favorite language to sing within the opera form?
Oh my goodness. So I'll just tell you, I sing in English, of course, French, German, Italian. Those were the original ones that I learned. I also, of course, fascination with Dvorak led me
Hmm.
to work with a Czech native conductor and to learn Czech. I also just started singing in Russian. And one of my ventures just took me to Iceland, where I am learning to sing in Icelandic, and there's nothing like that language.
Wow.
A native Icelander will always tell that I am American. There's no way I will ever be able to pass. But I'm working with Timothy Wallace over at Studio 59 to reset these world lullabies, and the first one we're working on is the Icelandic lullaby.
That's an exciting project.
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to hearing that.
But I have to say that my favorite language is Italian. Um, the Italian language really lends itself to this art form. I think the vowels are very pure. There's not a lot of diphthongs. So in singing, the vowels are incredibly important. Even in speech, the vowels are incredibly important. They're about the most important part of a word because they carry your sound.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
you think about the consonants. The consonants are formed by a closed mouth. Vowels are formed by an open mouth. So those are the things that you truly hear.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense. Okay, and you clearly you've studied that. You
Mhm.
have made that a mission to be able
Yes.
to know that, so that way you can be an expert in your process and
Yes.
being able
And
to.
it's so fascinating to me. So I have the certificate of vocal pedagogy, and we did a lot of voice science, and I mean, even went into spectrograms and learning about the physics of sound and the physics of the human voice. But I am now working on, to take it even the step further, I'm now working on going back to school for speech pathology because I want to be able to serve my students to be the absolute best vocalists that they can be and take care of their voices in the best, most healthy way possible.
You know what? It's interesting. You are a teacher, but you have not stopped learning, and I think that would be a valuable
Mm-hmm.
lesson for other people as well. Correct?
Absolutely.
So you take lessons yourself, or in working with Timothy Alexander Wallace
Mm-hmm.
there at Studio 59. That's fantastic. But you are also a teacher yourself, so you don't stop, but you don't stop learning.
Right. As a teacher, I don't think you can stop learning. I think you do a disservice to your students if you ever stop.
You know what? When we're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to come back for our final segment here as we continue our discussion with Katie Kat. We'll learn more about the theatrical work. We're going to talk more about her album and what she hopes to share with the listening audience on that, and much more here on Nutmeg Chatter. Welcome back to Nutmeg Chatter. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. I'm here in studio at WAPJ in Torrington, Connecticut, here with Katie Kat. Katie Kat is an opera-preneur. She has a new album which is coming out, Dvorak's Love Songs, which will be coming out March 25th, 2017. We've been talking about opera, the different methods of sharing opera with the world. We've also talked about a particular philosophy of the music is an art form because it has the ability to communicate stories beyond words, which is kind of the hallmark of the Katie Kat philosophy,
Yes.
if I could say
Yes. To communicate more than words can express. So even personally, everyone can remember the songs that they sang to themselves, like at their lowest moments in their lives and at the highest moments of their lives. Those songs sort of amplify and resonate with us through those experiences.
Music has huge power, and especially the thing about opera, though, is there is such an emotional component to it that you might not necessarily find in some of the top 40 type songs of today.
Right.
But there's an emotional component to it because there's a story behind it most often than not, right? And we talked about the theatrical element of an opera.
Yes.
Is there any type of theatrical experience that you enjoy the best as it relates to performing your opera? Is there one particular role that you like playing?
So one particular role that I like playing. I have a lot of dream roles. One of them happens to be Mary Poppins, but
I could see that. Yeah, sure.
Yes. So one of them happens to be Mary Poppins, but as far as opera goes, of course, Dvorak's Rusalka. I learned that as I was learning to speak Czech. That was actually my first experience, was to learn an entire opera in Czech. I don't do anything the easy way. So Rusalka, I love Mozart. Really anything Mozart. It's just so genuine, and he just speaks so well through the construction of his music. And so Despina in Così fan tutte is a very favorite role of mine. Yeah, I think
those are some of, if you had the top two, if you will. Or
yes, the top
couple.
two would be Rusalka and Despina.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Now, is theater something that interests you as well?
Very much so. Very much so.
Now, specifically, does it have to be a musical? Does music have to be a component to it?
No, not at all. I greatly enjoy. Actually, I really enjoy Greek theater. I'm very heady about that kind of thing. I really love the history and philosophy of it.
That's great. So you are a theater person, if you will.
Yes, I very much am.
A theatrical person as well as a musical person, and also art. Now, tell me about the artwork that's within your. I wanted to get back to this.
Yes.
The artwork that's within your, new album, the Dvorak's Love Songs. You created the artwork yourself.
Yes, it's all hand painted. Yeah. Let's see. I've always been an artist, and I was always in a situation where if I wanted something, I had to do everything myself. When I was young, I even taught myself to French braid my own hair because I was in a community theater production, and I taught myself to French braid my own hair because they wanted the girls in French braids. And I know I was very young. I think I was in like the 4th grade, and so I do everything myself. I make mostly all my own costumes. I do a lot of artwork. I actually took college art classes when I was in high school. So these songs, when I came across them, stuck with me for a couple of reasons. They were very, very cathartic for me to work on. But also, this story is just incredibly important. I don't really want to give so much away, but I think I can. So it was around the year 1865, and Anton Dvorak was head over heels in love with Josefina Chermenkova. She became one of his piano students. She was an actress, and he was playing for the Provincial Theater and met her there and became her piano teacher. And she ultimately rejected him. And Dvorak was so devastated that he actually locked himself in a room for 17 days, and he wrote these 18 songs that he titled The Cypresses, and it was after a set of poetry by Gustav Fleger-Moravsky by the same name. And he set these songs. This was the very first vocal music Dvorak ever wrote, were these songs. And it was so personal to him that he never published them in their entirety. He never published the original set. But those melodies haunted him for the rest of his life. You can hear those melodies in many of his other works, and there's a lot of scholarly dissertations written on the use of this music in his other works. And 23 years later, Anton Dvorak marries Josefina's younger sister, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Anna becomes his wife, and they travel the world. They have children. And so Dvorak takes this set of songs, he revisits it. And he takes 8 of these songs, and he edits them, and resets them in a very specific order. So why would he do that? And when you look at the poetry in the songs, and you look at the music that's there, they tell a very clear story. These 8 songs in succession tell a very clear story, and I wanted to illustrate that story. The story relates to the passage of time, and so I equated that to the changing seasons. So each song relates to a season of the year. Now there's 8 of them, so it sort of doubles up, but that was my vision for telling this story, was to create a timeline for it.
Wow. Okay, that's well. That just demonstrates kind of the theme that we've kind of talked about throughout our discussion. The idea of the power of music, and this, and I think the power comes in how personal it is, and how the emotion that he puts into it is the emotion that we hear. It's we feel like we are understanding where this person is coming from. We're in that person's head for a short time, as much as we can, because we can hear the emotion that's coming from it. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, yeah. Yes. And so I have to say, I'm very much more drawn in that respect to art song than actual opera.
Art song?
Really? So art song is poetry set to music, and each piece is sort of a piece on itself, whereas opera is, a very long work. An aria is a piece of an opera. It's a song from an opera, an aria, whereas an art song is a piece within itself, and the poetry can be interpreted both by the performer and the audience. So it can become something so much more personal than performing a character in an opera, say Musetta, which is something that I get asked to do all the time.
Katie Kat, if our listeners want to learn more about you and your work, and to find out more information about the album that we've discussed, or the Patreon place, where are the many different places that they can find access to your work?
I'm on Instagram all the time. Right now, my website is sort of under construction, but that's Katie Kat, cat with a K, opera.com. And I am working on really making better use of my Patreon page. So Patreon is Patreon, and it's /Katie Kat Opera. And you can go to the Patreon site and search for me, and you can find me. And that is a subscription. But I am going to be posting a video, every time I do anything. So the Dvorak concert, if you can't make it live, which is on the 25th, it's at Studio 59 at 8 o'clock. And if you can't make it to that, it'll be on the Patreon page. If you can't make it to one of my shows in New York, I put updates up there. I, of course, have to get permission from the venue and everything first. But if I can make a video, it goes up on the Patreon page so that anybody who's interested in my career and who's helping me to pursue it gets access to it.
Well, Katie Kat, that's so exciting. I highly recommend people to check that out if they'd like to check out Katie Kat Opera. I think those are the 3 key words. Putting them in that particular order, they should be able to find you.
Yes.
Katie Kat, thank you for coming on the Nutmeg Chatter program.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
Nutmeg Chatter is a production by WAPJ Torrington Community Radio. Some music has been provided by the Jingle Punks, courtesy of YouTube royalty-free music. Please stay tuned. At 4 o'clock, you will hear The Hotspot with Darcy. Thank you for listening.